So we'll shift from exploits into something, I guess, really a little more innocuous. We'll take a look at the internet weather for the last week or so here. And we hadn't reported on this sort of activity recently, but there is sort of an increase in it. This actually shows up as scan sources on port 17788 UDP. This is associated with PP Stream, which is basically like a point-to-point streaming protocol or application, I guess it is, popular for Chinese programming apparently. So we see an increase in the number of sources, the number of participants that are taking place in that. I suspect that what this is, either is something of significant interest that's popped up and you've got more viewers that are partaking of it, or perhaps there was a sort of a shift in the server infrastructure that's associated with this particular service. But in any case, there seems to be an increase in that activity. It appears to be innocuous. If you see that on your network and you're concerned about it, you have to make some decisions about whether that's acceptable on your enterprise network, for example. And there are some pointers on the internet about how you can control this type of activity on your network. Port 17788 is one of those ports that it depends on. Next item here is bytes on source port 161 UDP. That's Simple Network Management Protocol. The theme here is this appears to be, from my memory and experience, one of the largest reflective denial of service attacks that I have seen using SNMP. This particular one happens to have been going on for a few days, so it's large in that sense, but it's also large in terms of the number of the amount of bytes that it's generating, on the order of gigabits per second. I think most of the cases we've looked at in the past have been way down in the maybe 100 megabits per second or something like that. And you see some of these examples in the past. I guess there's one that went up to about 4 gigabits per second. But
well, you're looking at bits per hour here, though.
Oh, yeah, actually, maybe we should correct that. It's a good point. So it is relatively smaller than that. So good point, John. But in any case, it is one of the larger attacks that we've seen on this in this activity. It happens to be targeting a site in China, and so it's not an immediate threat to within the United States, but certainly one to be considering the vectors of denial of service attacks.
It's pretty well sustained too.
Yeah, it's well sustained.
It's a long duration, longer than we usually see attacks go on for.
Much larger than usual. So this probably is in the hundreds of megabits per second once we account for the fact that it's really showing per hour. The top 10 most ports here, we see there's been a shift here. That is, we're seeing port 22 on the top. We had been seeing port 23 on the top, so port 22 followed by port 23, then 443, which has moved up significantly, relatively speaking, and then 1900 UDP. We're going to take a little closer look at port 443, by the way. 1900 UDP, that's associated with reflective denial of service attack activity. 445 TCP, the configure stuff. 53 UDP, again, probing for DNS or associated with reflective DDoS attack activity. Port 135 TCP, we're still seeing activity on that port, which still baffles me that we see that, but it apparently continues. And then 1433 TCP, that's probing for Microsoft SQL database. 3389, that's remote desktop protocol, and then 8080 TCP, likely looking for proxies. So taking a little closer look at port 443 TCP, this is a little different than I typically show because this is where the anomaly really shows up. That's in scanned packets on port 443 TCP. And it's very unusual to see this type of behavior, but in this particular case, it's really a SYN reflection attack. It appears that the source address is spoofed in this case. They're spraying out SYN packets to a lot of different target addresses, and then waiting for the SYN ACK reflections to come back and then actually go to the original target associated with this. There are multiple sources, and this is one of the first cases I've seen in a long time. And the indicator of this is, again, simply, in fact, in a lot of cases what they do is they get SYN resets back. It doesn't even matter if they get a SYN ACK, they can get SYN resets back. And as a consequence, this target would be flooded with relatively small packets, but a lot of them because they're repeating this over and over and over again. Looking at the top 10 most sources doing probing, at the top of the list, port 23 TCP, followed by 445 TCP. I tend to skip over the ICMP protocol, by the way, partly because there are a number of contributors to it, and it's not necessarily a good, strong indicator unless you actually dig into where that activity is coming from and more specific characteristics of it. But again, 27015 UDP, and then followed by 6881. That's associated with BitTorrent, if I remember correctly. 1900 UDP, which is that reflective denial service attack activity. And then find the 3159 UDP, which I believe was a proxy protocol. Is that right?
I don't remember.
Yeah,
we looked it up last time too, and we couldn't remember last.
Tell me
week.
that's
I'm getting mixed up these days.
Yeah, I think it's the
Vega
Vega Web
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
All right, so I thought it'd be worth taking a look at, again, a little bit of the history associated with port 23 TCP, because it is at the top of the list here. We're looking at 90 days of activity. And again, we're looking at the number of sources. And as you recall, we were, seeing some botnet activity predominantly associated with Internet of insecure things, those unmanaged devices that don't have good patching practices and often have default passwords and unfortunately allow these malicious actors to kind of walk into them and use them for bots. The number of sources that are doing the probing is actually down. In fact, the number of probes is down somewhat as well. It's certainly not gone. There's a significant amount of activity taking place there. We're measuring thousands of sources here, and so we've kind of leveled off at around 40,000 sources at any given time in the day. But it is down relative to what we had seen over the last 90 days, which is, I think, an encouraging sign. I don't know if there have been some actions to basically deter some of this activity, or if it's just simply that they're laying idle for a while, but nevertheless less activity than we had seen previously.